Today we talk about the intersection of technology and creativity, and there's no better way to do this by getting one of the biggest technology company on the planet here, a company that can pretty much build anything, and then get a creative guy from that company. So I'm here to present Steve Vranakis from Google, talk about ideas.
Thank you so much. So actually, I'm not actually going to talk a lot about technology, so I don't want to disappoint anyone, because I think technology, as we heard from our fabulous speakers this morning, is an element of what we do, and it's a big element sometimes, but I think it's much more about what we as individuals and human beings can do. So I'll show you a couple of tech-led things, but then I want to really get into the things that make us human beings and the things that I feel we have an obligation as creative people to do and to give back. I don't want to make this about change the world and fall into sort of the big cliches where sometimes we get parodied and that sort of thing, but I do think, as per the title of my talk, I have this idea around creative activism and that we are able and we are capable to do a lot of things that are outside our everyday remit, that are outside of our day-to-day client obligations, outside of advertising. And I believe that people are talking about it being an incredibly exciting time to be alive. I agree it's an exciting time to be alive, but I also think it's an incredibly difficult time for the world. And I think people like us are really well positioned to be able to come back and help solve some of these problems that we're facing. So I'm here on two capacities, and I want to talk a tiny bit about the first one, which is I'm honored, and it's a massive privilege to be here as president of D&AD, and I'm here working with the guys on the judging and the event from ADCE, and I think the little time that we spent together in the last few days, it's weird. You feel like you've known somebody for a very long time. You feel like you've been friends for years, and I think it's fundamentally because we share the same values. I think this is the way we think about things, but I cannot believe it's dissimilar to the way you guys think about things, and you said the same thing. Excellence in design and advertising around the world, belief that it creates better outcomes, and that's a lot of what I want to talk about, and that the belief that we can create a fair, more diverse, properly gender-balanced industry. And a better one than we inhabit today. And I'm going to talk about diversity, and I'm going to give it I love the earlier explanation, and I talk as well about diversity of thought, but I'm going to talk about the way I feel it can make for a better creative environment. I want to play a little film just so you get a feel for D&AD, because it's an incredibly exciting organization. And as I said, that was D&AD's sort of, I don't know, call it vision, mission statement, and it's exactly what I believe. So when our paths crossed, it was awesome. And as I said, I cannot believe there aren't countless people here today who believe in the same things. So I want to show you something about the festival, just so you get a feel for what it's all about. And then I want to talk to you a bit about why we do what we do at D&AD, and then I'm going to show you some Google stuff.
I think London, as a creative city, needs and deserves a creative festival of this sort.
It's one of the world's most prestigious and sought-after creative awards. This is the week where we bring together the world's best creative talent to judge the world's best creative work.
This week has been a long time in the making. It's D&AD Judging Week and it's D&AD Festival.
You're never too old or experienced to still be an entrant. You still get the same thrill, the same nerves. All that lovely tender stuff is actually where the creative soul kind of lives, I think.
So we've got 3 days of Q&As, talks, workshops, training sessions, portfolio surgeries, evening events and parties, and then Saturday and Sunday we have an exhibition that's open to the public and free to attend.
to do, let's take your next right, go to the middle set of stairs, all right?
I've heard of D&AD when I was in design school, and since then I've always wanted to come to one of the design festivals.
Actually, I've been following the D&AD for many, many years, and I'm so pleased to be here.
I understand there's a party happening later, and I certainly won't be going.
Our pencils are a benchmark for creativity and a beacon for the future. Nothing matters more.
So why I wanted to show that? I wanted to show that because it ties into something I was asked to write as president, which is a manifesto which sets out the agenda that I hope to deliver against in the year that I'm president. And this is, you can't read it, but I'm going to go over it. It was published in Campaign, so thank you, Campaign. But it is very much based on my personal experience as a young Greek immigrant child growing up in Canada. And if any of you are of that background, not necessarily Greek, whatever, you know, people whose parents have moved from one place to another in search of a better life, a lot of the things that were offered to me as an individual in terms of profession and the things that my parents wanted me to study for were all sort of things that were economically driven. They were all the things that were rooted in making you better off financially. Now, for a kid growing up with these creative capabilities and not even knowing about the term creativity and thinking you're some sort of a weird deviant because you're left-handed and all these sorts of things, I wanted to tap into what I was seeing and hearing a lot of, which is this is kind of a universal thing. And there are loads of people out there because of where they come from, because of the socioeconomic background that they may come from, the ethnicity, they may never be in a position to end up here. And I'm going to talk about why I think that's important. I mean, there's the obvious reasons why it's important, but I think as a few of our speakers touched on this morning, I think it's incredibly important because when you get a bunch of different people together from different backgrounds and, as I said, ethnicities, all that sort of thing, you create these creative collisions, and everybody brings a bit of themselves. Everybody brings a different perspective, a point of view based on the way they grew up, the things they used to go, the church, the school, the whatever they did growing up. And I think these things make for a more interesting environment, which will move the work on, which will move us from being very blinded and move us from coming up with these sort of expected solutions. So from a D&AD perspective, they have interesting programs like Shift. Shift is a thing that allows people who don't necessarily come from a well-to-do background, who don't necessarily have a university degree, weren't able to go to design school like myself, and it allows them to study evenings when they have their day jobs, when they may be a barista, they may be whatever. And I think this is an incredibly important thing. And I'm mentioning these things because, as I said, diversity in my mind drives creativity. And the last point I want to make on the D&AD before I go into some of the Google work is that, to me, is the power of the pencil. We have, you know, ADC, One Show, D&AD, not-for-profit organizations who take ticket sales, who take festival sales, ceremony sales. You win a pencil, you buy a pencil. All of that money goes back into foundation, education, all these sorts of things. And that's incredibly important because I think, as I said at the beginning of this, we have a lot of work to do in the world. It's not just about looking at, you know, how we make stuff for our clients better. It's about trying to fix stuff. A colleague of mine said this quote that I unashamedly stole. He said, "We don't just make dents in the universe, we fix dents in the universe." And I want to show you a bit of my humble attempt at how I try to do that. So that, to me, is the power of the pencil, the award. Now I want to talk a bit about some of the work that I do, and this sort of idea that I have that I don't think is my thing. I think it's based on conversations which I have with people in the industry who feel may be frustrated, maybe slightly disillusioned, and feel like they can do so much more. And so that's why I said I don't want to go into change the world and all those sort of, Silicon Valley, the comedy cliche, but people who feel I have so much more to do, and I'm capable of so much more. So this idea of that we collectively are much more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. So a tiny bit about my group. I run a small group of about 20 people in London called the Creative Lab. And that 20 people includes creators, producers, team leads, but also product designers, industrial designers, interior architects, a real mix of different people. In terms of disciplines, in terms of, as I said, where they're from, I think 60% right now is female. I'm trying to get more in senior creative leadership. I think we're all trying to do more of that because it's incredibly important, as I said before. And I think I represent almost every continent pretty well, and I'm incredibly proud of that. And I think it's one of those things that I don't orchestrate it, but I think about it. I think about the decisions we make in terms of how we hire, where we hire. I do not default to the expected. I do not default to what's in front of me. I spend a bit more time. And I think that's how you do these things. And this is what we try to do. We try to invent the futures. That sounds pretty epic. It's very difficult. And this is why we do it. I think you could cover up that logo, that logo, the Google thing, remind the world what they love about Google. I think you could put some of your clients or some of your businesses. And I think as companies grow, as companies get older, all these sorts of things, you need to keep reminding people what it was that made you fall in love with them the first time. And that's what we try to do when we put this stuff out there and you go, oh my God, Google just, they did it again, or wow, that's incredible, or that. So the first thing I want to share is something that we launched about a year ago as a technology, and then we launched as an actual product a few weeks ago, which is pretty cool. We were really fortunate. This got us a Grand Prix in Cannes in product. And what I'm really proud of is both that we were able to do something like this, but also I think a lot of the stuff you see sometimes in the award shows, especially some of the social impact stuff, a year later, you revisit it and you think, what happened to that thing? And did that ever go anywhere? So it's really important to consistently sort of deliver against these things. So this is something called Project Jacquard, and it was positioned very much around this idea of weaving technology into our garments. And if you think about clothing, or if you think about technology, like our phones and wearables, like watches, they're almost sort of add-ons and accessories that you carry with you. But there's something that you generally show up with every day, which is clothing. And we thought in the effort of trying to create what, this sort of much sought-after invisible interface, was there a way that you could still tap into the processing power and the connectivity of those devices, but get them completely out of the way? And that's what we attempted to do with Project Jacquard. And it's based on a conductive thread, and the conductive thread is made of copper wire. The copper wire is woven, and when you weave the copper wire, you can pass a current through it. So you could pass a current through the thread. When you take multiple threads, as you can see in red, and you weave them in a grid, you create a structure which is a capacitive surface. So it is not dissimilar to a touch screen, because you're able to place your fingers on this thing, and it understands what you're touching, which is, again, an interesting concept. And then you are able to connect it to all the processing power, tether it, whether it's Bluetooth or whatever, that is in your phone. So those little tiny things allow you to create interactive clothing, allow you to create clothing that allows you to put haptic pads in and help you navigate, all these interesting things. Then you are able to take that and weave it into any sort of fabric and make it invisible. So you could see it on the inside, but we wove it into denim, and I'll show you how we did that. So a little bit about this project.
In 2015, ATAP, Google's Advanced Technology and Projects Group, pioneered a new wearable technology, one that would blend into our lives in a much more natural and seamless way. Project Jacquard has made it possible to invisibly weave technology into any textile, transforming everyday clothes into interactive surfaces, using conductive threads and miniaturized electronics.
The structure of textiles is the same to the structure of touchscreens, which we're using in everyday mobile devices and tablets. If you just replace some of the threads in textiles with conductive threads, you should be able to weave the textile, which can recognize a variety of simple touch gestures. The challenge of creating Jacquard yarn was to create yarn that is highly conductive and at the same time scalable, which means it could be used on industrial weaving machines everywhere in the world.
We can shrink down all the components to the size of a button, and this will be something that's so small we can embed into the manufacturing process so the users won't even see it or feel it inside the garment.
The idea that Jacquard is an interface that is blended into the clothing that we wear, that has an implication in the way that you would use services, products, applications, and anything that we do through our devices. It's somehow getting the technology out of the way and making interactions more natural and more seamless.
Jacquard is a blank canvas for designers and developers. We are just at the beginning, and we are really excited to see what people are going to do with it.
So very much around the theme of creativity and engineering, if a lot of these initial devices were made by the engineers, now you have engineers who are actually weaving the technology into the clothing, but the clothing is designed by the designers. And that creates a really interesting dynamic because you have fully functional fashion. So a few weeks ago, and you can get this in New York, I think it's across America, we launched this. We launched the Commuter Series jacket, which is for cyclists. And it has a lot of that capability that I just talked about baked in, so have a look at this. So again, you can obviously, during the onboarding process, you can assign different gestures to the different capacitive surfaces on the clothing, on the sleeves. You can, silence, you can, pinch, zoom, drop pins, all that sort of stuff. You assign those to an action on the phone, which calls, a different suite of web services, which allows you to take and tap into the full capability of the phone. So that was pretty cool. The next thing I want to show very quickly, and then I want to get into some of this tech for good type stuff, is something that we did last year. And again, I was fortunate enough to be in the innovation and integration jury, and we saw a lot of VR, and some of it was really cool. And then some of it, like a lot of things that you see in the world today, you were trying to figure out what is the problem that's actually solving. Are these sort of first world problems that we're trying to address with technology? So I'm always really conscious working at a technology company that you're actually solving real world challenges. So you have these organizations, these museums, these natural history museums, which sometimes are thought of, well, firstly, they're a collection of, I guess, humanity, everything, the world, history, everything. And sometimes they're thought of representations of the past. And sometimes they're thought of this place that you just kind of archive stuff, and you go and you reflect on it and you reference it. And I think what we were trying to do was show the role that technology could play in giving these places a new lease of life and inspiring kids from all over the world to really understand where we've been and where we're going. So we did this interesting VR project called Back to Life in Virtual Reality, where we took two iconic fossils, one from the museum in Berlin and one from the museum in London at the Natural History Museum, a Ramaliosaurus, which was the largest sea marine reptile. Victorians, I think, referred to it as a sea dragon, and the largest, I believe, the largest dinosaur at the time, the Giraffatitan, in the museum in Berlin. And we went in, we scanned the space, LiDAR, all that sort of stuff, and we positioned the camera both in the museum that allowed you to actually take some Google Cardboard, and I'll talk a bit about why I think Google Cardboard is important, but take our sort of $5, I don't even know what it costs these days, VR viewer, stand in the museum. If you're with your parent, take their phone, put your phone in, launch YouTube, launch it on YouTube, so no native applications, nothing, and take a look at this thing with a running commentary, come to life in front of your very eyes. Which is pretty amazing. And if you haven't had a chance to do it, I'd love for you to do it. But more importantly, it allows you to not be there and to understand what is in the museum and remotely be able to experience the same thing. And that, to me, was a really important thing that we were trying to address with this. So I'll just show you a bit of it. So I think, again, I'm trying to do something difficult. I'm trying to show you VR, which is based on something in situ. You're looking at real bones, a real skeletal structure come to life. And why did we do this? As I said, to show the role that technology could play in a space like this, but also there was a whole narrative around the actions that we're taking and what was happening at the time, whatever theory you believe in why mass extinction was caused at the time. But we want to talk to young people about every decision that they're making and how it goes on to impact and affect the environment and endangered species and all those sorts of things, and talk to their parents, talk to people in the community about it. And then the last thing I want to talk about and share a couple pieces of work, back to this idea of being more powerful than we think, is sort of this is more of a mind dump in terms of what I think, and this sort of epiphany I had about a year ago. And how I got to the we are more powerful and we should all tap into our creative activism, which a lot of these are really obvious, but I think we saw some incredible statistics and data about human beings and behaviors this morning. And I think, to me, the bulk of my early career was very much rooted in looking at people as things you sell stuff to. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we buy stuff, we wear stuff, we eat stuff, we fly places. So there will always be, I think, a role for that. But I think there is a whole world beyond looking at people as just commercial transactions. And when you think about people as people who have whatever, they have kids, they have mortgages, they have cars that break down, and you try to empathize. People talk a lot about empathy, and I think if you really think about empathy, you will try to understand that most people will never be able to get into a room like this or go to the restaurants that we eat at. Most people have to look at, line by line, a check when it comes to them from a restaurant and make sure that they weren't overcharged by £2 or something like that. That is the reality of the real world. And then there's the developing world where people are walking miles for clean water and these sorts of things. So I think understanding the hardships that the real world is enduring. And as I said, a lot of my career, I did big advertising campaigns and all that, and I loved every single minute of it. I just felt this sort of, I was a bit of a malcontent, and I felt this desire to be able to do more, but I always felt, but I'm in advertising, like you can do the awards things, and you can do some charitable stuff, but you can't really affect the big stuff that's happening out there. And then I tried to do it, and I'll show you a couple of examples of how I tried to do it, and encourage you guys to do it. And this is fundamentally why I think we can do it. I think, and this is just an observation that I made, and I don't want it to sound arrogant, I believe that the way that we actually break down problems, all right, and the way we think about actually solving them and then bringing them to life through some sort of a narrative, dare I say story, the way that we do these things is in my opinion, unique to our industry. There are probably other people doing similar types of things, but I think the combination of our problem-solving ability and our storytelling ability, that combination of those two things puts us in a unique place to be able to do things. And I don't know about you guys, but like sometimes I'll be out with a bunch of friends who are, whatever, much more qualified, whether they're architects or whether they're PhDs in something or another, and they'll put a problem out, and you'll get really excited, and you'll just say a bunch of stuff, and they'll be like, wow, how did you do that? And I think it's the thing that is ingrained in all of us as creative people, and you don't know how you do that, and you think that's the easy bit, and they're the smart ones, but it's an instinctive thing that you just do, and we talked a bit about instinct this morning. So back to the thing about the charity on the side and maybe win an award or not, which is, as I said, is important, but it's not the driving force. One of the things that we're taught at Google is to practice everyday altruism, to do good things whilst doing your day-to-day job. Don't wait till the end of your career to say, I'm going to redeem myself for a life of sin, and I'm going to do good, and I'm going to help people. You can do that. They're not mutually exclusive with what you do. And as I said, the commerciality that you bring, I don't think has to be deemed a bad thing, because that's what we do. But by the same token, you could be doing stuff that encourages whoever, clients, big businesses, to be making less of an impact on environment, et cetera. So this is what we try to do, because I believe that we should all become much more activist and use our creativity to do these things. So I want to show you two more projects very quickly. And the first one is something that we were tasked with at the United Nations, which was pretty cool. And it was this idea of when the world leaders were coming together a couple of years ago to talk about their countries, to talk about what they were going to do with the world. There was an opportunity working with UNICEF, who has a system that allows young people from around the world to send messages through the system. There was an opportunity to try to literally stop the world leaders in their tracks and put messages from the countries that they were representing in front of them to tell them, you have to take notice of what's happening on your turf. You have to address it. You have to do these things. And then the second one is something that we did in 2015 for the Syrian refugees fleeing civil war in Syria, ending up in Turkey, and then being trafficked from Turkey on boats across to Greece, where I'm originally from, and in this specific instance, Lesbos. I was saying at breakfast this morning, I'll get emotional. I have never been able to tell the story without a tear in my eye, and it's not for effect, and it's not because of what we did. It's just I've never been put in a position like this, and so out of my comfort zone, to think I could even make a tiny dent, let alone fix the dent. But more importantly, I have never seen people in this type of situation, and the things that people are going through in the world right now. So it's not about what we did. We did something tiny. It's about what people are going through in the world right now, and we need to take notice and do what we can. So Assembly of Youth installation gives youth a voice at the UN. As I said, world leaders need to know what hardships their populations are facing. We wanted to give youth a voice. So we created an installation at the United Nations. And this installation needed to represent the different nations and the different types of people who were speaking on behalf of the nations. So we created this system, and this is just some early Photoshop work, of we took all these different shapes and colors and monitor sizes and these sorts of things, and we assembled them in a way that allowed us to represent people in an interesting and diverse way. We had a huge challenge, which is in most developing nations, or in many developing nations, people don't necessarily have the latest handsets connected through a broadband connection or whatever, 4G. They have feature phones, much like this one. So we had to come up with a system that allowed you to send a text message from a feature phone through the internet into an installation at the United Nations in real time, so it could get in front of a world leader as they were going in to pass policy in the General Assembly. I can breathe now. very difficult, these things, but you have to give it a go. So that's exactly what we did. We created the system. We needed it to we needed it to stop them in their tracks. We needed them to go into this space, and we had this really interesting thought, which was they know where they sit in the General Assembly, so why not create create the installation to mirror the General Assembly. So when they walk by where they're supposed to sit, they will understand that that is their constituency for all intents and purposes. And then we needed that system that UNICEF was powering, UReport, to be able to fire off these questions, and then in real time you'd see these things light up with answers from all over the world. And it was magical. I mean, it was really magical to see it in real life. In the main entrance of the United Nations. I mean, you know, sometimes I pinch myself and I think, how did this happen? So this is what it looked like. It was launched by Ban Ki-moon, David Beckham, the head of UNICEF. And I'll show you a little film.
On the 25th of September 2015, the UN General Assembly of World Leaders convened to discuss the global goals, a new universal set of targets to help people all over the world. UNICEF, in collaboration with Google, saw an opportunity to put disadvantaged and vulnerable children at the heart of the agenda. Using technology, they set out to connect the voices of young people to those in power. This is the Assembly of Youth, an installation bringing the voices of real children from all over the world to the heart of the United Nations headquarters in New York. Each figure represented a real child, speaking out about what matters to them. They were designed and arranged to mirror the Royal General Assembly Hall, symbolizing a newly formed assembly of children representing their individual nations. UReport, UNICEF's social monitoring tool, sent a series of thought-provoking questions to a network of children in developing nations, inviting them to respond for free from any mobile phone, even with SMS, and have their messages appear in the main entrance of the UN.
I'm scared of walking home all by myself. I want to stay in school so one day I could feed my family. We had to leave our homes because of the violence.
The hopes and needs of real children were put in front of world leaders as they made their way into the General Assembly Hall to initiate talks.
Eliminate poverty, fight disease,
improve education.
UNICEF, David Beckham and Ban Ki-moon unveiled the Assembly of Youth in front of global media, and the initiative went on to reach billions of people worldwide.
It's our opportunity to change the future of the world and give every child an equal chance in life.
By bringing children's voices to the attention of those in power, we called on them to listen and take steps towards positive change for every child in danger, truly giving them a voice that could be heard.
So it was a huge honor to be able to work on something like that. And then the last thing I want to share, a little thing we built to try to do what we could do. And as I said, I'm going to get emotional, so I may as well get it out of the way. But we were at a global conference a couple of years ago at the height of the Syrian crisis, and the leadership team was making both financial donations, infrastructural. We were putting Wi-Fi in camps to provide schools and education, integration programs in places like Germany to teach people local languages, help them find jobs. But one of the things that was happening, and it was the height of this, largest displacement of people since World War II. One of the things that was happening was thousands of people were coming over on boats, and they were landing in Lesbos, as you can see. And I'm Greek. I'm from Crete, sort of in the same vicinity, but further south. And I remember at this leadership conference, when they were asking about what else we can do with our products and our technology to help people, because we help people all over the world. We help them get places, we help them translate languages, we help them find things. Our communications products, Hangouts, allow them to connect with family and friends. Surely you could use some of this stuff to help people in real need. So when I mentioned that I had a lot of people on the ground, a lot of friends who were spending time trying to help and volunteer, and what they were seeing was that people were coming over. You've seen these images before. People were coming over, they were being trafficked, but when they were landing, there were a lot of NGOs and a lot of volunteers on the ground. They were helping with the really, really, really important stuff, like keeping people dehydrated people hydrated, food, warmth, shelter, that sort of thing. But there was a huge bottleneck from an information architecture perspective. There were people arriving. They didn't know how to get to the camps. They didn't know how to seek emergency and medical aid. They didn't know what to do when they got there in terms of how to go through the asylum-seeking process. And again, back to the problem-solving storytelling. You know, these things were things not necessarily by way of theme that we do every day, but we're always posed with all these different sorts of problems, and you look for an insight, and you look for a way of approaching this in a really compelling and human and simple way. And then we saw this thing happening, which is, you could see, I think, 2 phones in this image here. It was the first time, at least I had seen, in a crisis like this, where the phone played such an integral role, the mobile phone. And people were landing, and they were putting their phone up, and they were looking for a signal. So we thought, well, if they don't have connectivity, we need to give connectivity. So we went about providing Wi-Fi to the islands. And secondly, they have no information, none of the information. And as I said, we have some incredible products, and it wasn't a sales thing, it was can you use maps to show them how to get to the camps? Can you use Google Translate so that people speaking Arabic can speak to people in English or in Greek? Can you use Hangouts to tell your family back home, if you have a connection, that you arrive safely? And that was the premise of the Refugee Info Hub, which we built alongside the IRC and NetHope, a couple of NGOs. And these are more pictures on the island that I took. Again, like, you know, we talk, there's this Maslow's hierarchy of needs pyramid that you've probably seen, and it has these 2 added rows on the bottom of it, and one is connectivity and web access, and then the other one is battery. And I saw this playing out. It's meant to be a joke, and our reliance on technology. I saw this playing out in a humanitarian crisis, like these, you know, swarming Vodafone, SIM cards, phones, batteries, chargers, anything you want. Yeah, like power. So we went over there, and they sent us. I mean, Google being Google, I put my hand up and I said to the leadership team, can we go over there, build this little information hub, and use some of the products that you just identified to help people in need? And the head of marketing, Lorraine, said, yeah, can you go there on Monday? And I was like, go there on Monday? And yeah, go there, just go and do it next week. And that's what I love about my company. And it's incredibly, you know, I'm in an incredibly fortunate position. So I went out there the following week with a couple of people. I was completely in shell shock for a week, and this is where I get emotional. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It's one thing like that advert that we saw yesterday that showed, you know, you can turn it off, they can't. When you see these things, there's something about proximity and the intimacy of being there that really affects you. So we went there, and we did almost what I would have done, in the Creative Lab. We like walked the routes. We looked at what people were doing. We saw people handing out like wet pieces of paper that said, this is what you need to do and where you need to go. And we were information gathering. We were talking to people. We were helping people, doing what we could. But as I said, like the trauma that we were seeing was just, you know, and I'm conscious that I'm here telling you about what we did because I want to encourage you to do stuff like that, because It wasn't, a massive thing that we did, but I want to make sure that I don't want to underplay what the people were actually going through who were experiencing this. So we built this thing called the Refugee Info Hub, and it does a lot of what I just talked about. If you can see everything, the little icons, the types of information, black on white, which uses 40% less battery. That is true, again, unless there's some more technical person who wants to challenge me on that. And after the first day of information gathering, I went to the hotel. And I kind of like scamped. I drew up some of these icons and with the team on the ground, the two individuals, and I called the team in London. And I'm going to say this not to brag. I'm going to say this because it's what you can do. And I told them, hey, this is what we're seeing. This is what you need to do. You need to figure out how we're going to build this in a scalable way because it's got to run across different regions. It's got to be used by different NGOs, some of which may not know how to code. And London worked overnight. We had a prototype in the morning. We took it to the IRC. We showed it to the IRC. And you've got to remember the NGOs on the ground, they're literally dealing with like trauma and medical emergency and people going through really, really difficult situations. So we show them this thing, and they're like, wow, like, can we have it? Can we literally take it right now? Because we don't have time to do this sort of stuff, and maybe they didn't know how to do this sort of thing. I called back London, and later that day, they had a working prototype in 36 hours from start to finish, built in Google Docs. Again, I sound like a salesperson. Built in Google Docs. But what's important about Google Docs is you type into it, it's online. And we handed it to an NGO. And at the end of the week, we were back in London. And as I said, like before I show this, I joke about these things. But I don't know about you guys. Somebody earlier, when you said, I think you were referencing imposter syndrome, how many of you feel like you shouldn't be here and put up your hand? And I put up my hand and somebody laughed at me behind me because they thought I was being silly. I think if you don't have an element of imposter syndrome, humility, if you don't have maybe, sometimes you think you are not the most confident person. You can see me up here. I don't think I'm, I've spoken to larger groups. I still get freaked out. I think there's a problem. I think the thing that grounds you and makes you a human being and makes you different than the machines and those sorts of things are those elements of humility. I joke about this, and I don't want to sound like a horrible person, but like, if, the tire on our car, we got a flat tire the other day, and my poor wife had to change it because I can't do stuff like that. I don't know how to do these things. I was out of the country, to be fair, but, my kids put bookshelves together. I don't know how to do anything other than what we do, but I think that we could do more. So I'll just show this little film.
The civil war in Syria has forced millions to flee their homes, causing the worst refugee crisis since the Second World War. In the summer of 2015, up to 7,000 refugees were arriving on the Greek islands every day, often with just the necessities, legal documents, and mobile phones. They landed not knowing exactly where they were, what to do, nor where to go next. They needed information to ensure their safety and security, but much of the information available was inaccurate, out of date, or in a language they did not understand. That's why the International Rescue Committee, Mercy Corps, and Google created Refugee Info Hub, a mobile site for NGOs to give refugees accurate and up-to-date information. It's powered by Google Docs, a tool NGOs are familiar with, to make it easy to update with vital information as quickly as possible. Information like how to register and seek asylum, how to get to refugee camps, maps, medical resources, and anything else they might need, all in their native language. The site was designed to load quickly and in white on black to preserve battery. We let refugees know about the site through posters, banners, stickers, Wi-Fi landing pages, and volunteers. The site was created in only 36 hours and launched in Lesbos. Within 4 months, it was being used in 18 locations across Europe by more than 30 NGOs and counting. Because it was built in a simple way, NGOs can deploy and update it quickly and easily in any future crisis.
So this might sound a bit counterintuitive coming from the president of D&AD, but this was never entered into awards, and it will never be entered into awards. I think it's actually inappropriate. I show it because I want, hopefully, people to feel they can also do things like this, and as I said, it's a very small thing. And it's going on. I mean, this was done 2 years ago, and like somebody rightly pointed out to me about a week ago, in Denmark, the real difficulty is starting now. So they said, oh, you know, they're coming over. You did they were a bit antagonistic with me, which I didn't think was appropriate. They said, you did the easy bit. I was like, yeah, maybe from our perspective, but being trafficked across the Aegean in a raft holding your children, I don't think is easy for these poor people. But they said, you know, there are this xenophobia spreading across Europe. There is the lack of integration. They show up. There's the Islamification, the radicalization of Islamic youth, all that sort of stuff. These are the things that we need to also look at. We need to address. So there's many things we can do. And this was, as I said, a tiny thing. So that's just a bit of what I think. And I think that we are capable of incredible things. I do believe that. And this is where I might sound a bit arrogant. I think we are. I think we are a special breed of people. And I think that what we do, and this is a thing that Google says a lot, is we give superpowers to others. So we go on to allow other people to do amazing things with our creative capability. So we should all be creative activists. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve.